If you enjoy true disturbing horror stories, you would definitely be a fan of my channel. I upload true stories regularly, so if you want to be part of the journey, please like and subscribe. As always, enjoy the video. I never thought I'd end up in a situation that felt like it was pulled straight from a bad horror movie. You know, the ones where the main character is just trying to live their life, and then suddenly everything goes completely off the rails. That was me, and it all started when I met Jenna. We hit it off at a mutual friend's party. She was vibrant, full of life, and there was just something about her that drew me in. I should have realized that sometimes the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. Our relationship started off like any other, endless texting, spontaneous outings, and that initial rush of excitement that comes with new love. But as weeks turned into months, I began to notice small red flags. Jenna had this intense need for attention. If I didn't respond to her text within minutes, she'd bombard me with messages, asking if I was upset or if I was seeing someone else. At first, I brushed it off as typical relationship anxiety. I figured everyone has their quirks, right? But as time went on, her behavior escalated, and I found myself walking on eggshells. One night, we were hanging out at my place, and I casually mentioned how I was thinking of going out with some friends the next weekend. The reaction was immediate and explosive. She started crying and telling me how she was worried I'd leave her for someone else, that she had been abandoned in the past, and that she just couldn't handle the thought of being alone again. It broke my heart to see her like that, but it also made me uneasy. I assured her I wouldn't go anywhere, and for a while, it seemed to calm her down. But calming her down only lasted so long. The more I tried to reassure her, the more possessive she became. She wanted to know where I was at all times. If I went out with friends, she would text me constantly, asking for updates, and I could feel the tension building. I started to feel trapped, like I was losing my freedom. I'd never been in a relationship like this, and it scared me. I thought maybe it was just a rough patch and things would get better, so I tried to hang in there. Then came the incident that really shook me. I was out with my friends one Friday night. We went to a bar downtown, and I thought it would be a good way to unwind. Jenna had mentioned she might join later, but I didn't think much of it. I lost track of time, laughing and joking with my friends, when suddenly I got a text from her. It was a stream of frantic messages, asking where I was, why I hadn't responded, and accusing me of ignoring her. I texted back, trying to explain that I was just having a good time with friends, and that I'd see her later. When I finally got home, I found Jenna sitting on my couch, arms crossed, lips pressed into a tight line. My heart sank. She was clearly upset, and I knew I had to tread carefully. I tried to talk to her to explain that it was just a night out, but she wouldn't let me finish. Instead, she launched into a tirade about how I didn't care about her feelings, how I was just like all the other guys who had hurt her. I felt my stomach drop. It was like I was trapped in a whirlwind of emotions that I couldn't escape. From that night on, things spiraled even further. Jenna started showing up unannounced at my job, waiting outside until I finished my shift. I started to feel like I couldn't breathe. I would get off work, and there she was, with that look of desperation in her eyes, demanding my attention. I tried to set some boundaries, explaining that it wasn't healthy for either of us, but it only infuriated her. She would cry, plead, and then switch to anger in the blink of an eye. It was exhausting. One day, I decided I'd had enough. I was going to break up with her. It was one of the toughest decisions I've ever made, but I knew it was for the best. I texted her, asking to meet up so we could talk. As I sat in the cafe, my heart raced. I was nervous, but also relieved. I thought I was finally taking control of my life again. When Jenna walked in, I could see the storm brewing behind her eyes. I didn't even get to finish my sentence before she was yelling, tears streaming down her face. She begged me not to leave, and I felt my resolve wavering. But I pushed through, telling her it was over. That's when things took a dark turn. Jenna began stalking me. At first, it was just small things. She would show up at places I frequented, like the gym and coffee shops, but then it escalated quickly. I started getting strange messages on social media, filled with cryptic threats that made my skin crawl. She even showed up at my apartment when I wasn't home, leaving notes on my door, telling me how much she loved me and how lost she felt without me. It was terrifying. I tried to ignore it, hoping she would just get the hint. But then one night, I came home to find my front door ajar. My heart raced as I stepped inside, calling out to see if anyone was there. That's when I saw it, a note on my kitchen counter, written in her unmistakable handwriting, telling me how much she missed me and how she would do anything to get me back. I could feel panic rising inside me. This wasn't just a bad breakup, this was turning into a nightmare. I decided to take action. I reached out to friends and family, explaining what was happening. They were supportive and encouraged me to involve the police. I hesitated, worried about escalating the situation even further, but I knew I had to protect myself. When I finally filed a report, the officer listened patiently, but cautioned me that it could provoke her. I didn't care. I was done living in fear. Things quieted down for a while. I thought maybe Jenna had finally moved on, but I was wrong. One night, I got a call from a block number. I didn't answer, but when I checked my voicemail, my blood ran cold. It was Jenna, crying and begging me to take her back, her voice trembling with desperation. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew I had to keep my distance. But the final straw came when I found a message left in my mailbox. It was a picture of my apartment taken from the street, the caption reading, "I'll always be watching you." I felt my heart race as I realized this wasn't just a bad breakup anymore. This was something far more sinister. I contacted the police again, and this time they took it seriously. They started a file and advised me to get a restraining order. That was the moment I knew I had to completely cut ties and move on. I packed my things, found a new place, and changed my number. It was a long, difficult process, but I finally felt free. Jenna had become a ghost in my past, haunting me with memories I never wanted to relive. The crazy part, even after all that, a part of me still felt sorry for her. I hoped she would find help, but I also knew I couldn't be part of that journey. I had to prioritize my own peace of mind. Now, looking back, it's hard to believe how quickly things escalated. That vibrant girl I met at the party morphed into someone I barely recognized. It's a strange feeling to realize that someone can switch from love to obsession in such a short time. I've learned my lesson, but it's a chapter of my life I'll never forget. You know how some relationships start off like a fairy tale, only to spiral into a twisted nightmare? Well, that's what happened to me. I met Jess at a party. She was bubbly, with this infectious laugh that made you want to be around her. We hit it off instantly. I was drawn in by her energy, her spontaneity, and the way she could light up a room. The first few months were a whirlwind of adventures, late-night drives, and laughter. Everything felt perfect, and I thought I had found someone special. But soon, the cracks began to show. Jess had this intensity that was both captivating and slightly unsettling. At first, I brushed it off as passion. She was fiercely devoted, always wanting to know where I was, who I was with, and what I was doing. I thought it was cute, a sign of how much she cared. But then it started to feel suffocating. She wanted to meet my friends, my family, and I could sense an underlying need for control. The first real red flag came during a weekend trip with my buddies. Jess insisted on tagging along. I figured it would be fun, but midway through the trip, she became increasingly irritable. Her jealousy flared when I shared a few laughs with one of my friends. It was strange to see her go from cheerful to icy in a matter of seconds. I tried to lighten the mood, but nothing worked. The rest of the weekend felt off, like I was walking on eggshells. I brushed it off, thinking it was just a rough patch, but deep down, I knew something was amiss. From that point on, things only escalated. Jess would send me dozens of texts when I was out, asking where I was, who I was with, and when I'd be home. It wasn't just the frequency, it was the tone. I could feel her anxiety through the screen. The fun late-night chats turned into frantic messages, and I found myself constantly reassuring her that I was fine. I started to resent the way she made me feel guilty for wanting to spend time with my friends. It was exhausting, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing myself. Despite the tension, I convinced myself to stay. I thought I could help her, that she just needed a little understanding. I spent countless hours listening to her fears, her insecurities. She had a rough past, and I genuinely wanted to be there for her. But the more I tried to support her, the more she seemed to spiral. She began to isolate me from my friends, subtly planting seeds of doubt about them. "Are they really your friends if they don't support us?" she would say, and I started to question everything. The breaking point came one evening when I returned home late after hanging out with a couple of friends. Jess was waiting for me, and her eyes were filled with a mix of anger and fear. I had no idea what I was walking into. She accused me of lying about where I had been, claiming I was out with someone else. I tried to explain, but it was like talking to a wall. She was convinced I was cheating, and no matter how many times I reassured her, her rage only intensified. I felt trapped in a storm, and each attempt to calm her only fueled the fire. After that night, things became chaotic. She started showing up at my workplace unannounced, claiming she wanted to surprise me. But it felt like a surveillance mission. I could see the judgment in her eyes whenever I interacted with a coworker. I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but the tension was unbearable. I was constantly on edge, tiptoeing around her feelings, trying to avoid another explosion. One day, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. It was time to end things. I thought it would be simple. I planned it out in my head, but when I finally sat down with her, the conversation took a dark turn. Jess erupted, crying and screaming, but it wasn't just sadness. It was rage. She accused me of abandoning her, of being just like everyone else who had hurt her. I had never seen this side of her, and it terrified me. I didn't know how to handle it. I had broken her heart, and in turn, she was breaking mine. After I left, I thought I'd finally be free, but that was just the beginning of my nightmare. Jess didn't take the breakup well. She started sending me messages, dozens of them. At first, they were desperate pleas to talk, but soon they morphed into threats. She claimed she'd ruin my life if I didn't come back to her. I tried to block her number, but she found ways around it. She created new accounts on social media, reaching out under different names. It felt like I was being stalked. I'd see her name pop up in my notifications, and my heart would race. Things escalated further when she showed up at my apartment one night. I was caught off guard. I had made sure to change my locks after the breakup, thinking I was safe. But Jess had a way of making herself known, and she was persistent. She banged on my door, screaming for me to let her in. I called the police, but when they arrived, she was gone, leaving me shaken and terrified. I felt like I was living in a horror movie, where the villain just wouldn't go away. In the weeks that followed, I became a recluse. I stopped going out, stopped hanging with friends, and started working from home just to avoid running into her. My anxiety shot through the roof. Every time I heard a knock at the door or saw someone who resembled her, panic would set in. I lost weight, and my friends started to notice. They urged me to report her, but I was scared of escalating things further. I felt trapped in my own life, and it was suffocating. Eventually, I had to make a decision. I sought legal advice and filed a restraining order. It was a daunting process, but it was the only way to reclaim my life. Once it was in place, I finally felt a sense of relief. I thought it would be the end of it, that I could finally breathe again. But Jess didn't stop. She violated the order multiple times, showing up at my workplace, my gym, even my family's house. Each time I reported her, but it felt like a game of cat and mouse. She was relentless. As the months rolled on, I slowly began to piece my life back together. I started therapy to work through the trauma, and it helped. I learned to set boundaries, to recognize the signs of toxicity in relationships. But I would be lying if I said I was completely free. The scars of that experience lingered, and I still catch myself looking over my shoulder, waiting for her to reappear. It's a reminder of how love can turn into obsession, how someone so enchanting can become a living nightmare. I learned that sometimes the craziest ex isn't just a story you hear about. It's a reality you live through. And for me, it was a chapter one thought I'd never escape. I remember the first time I met Jess. It was a Friday night at a bar, and I was just there to unwind after a long week. You know how it goes, you grab a drink, you chat with your friends, and the night carries on. Jess was sitting a few stools down, and there was something magnetic about her. It wasn't just her looks. It was the way she laughed, the way she threw her head back and forgot the world for a moment. I thought, why not? And walked over. We hit it off right away, talking about everything and nothing. By the end of the night, we exchanged numbers, and I felt like I had stumbled upon something special. In the beginning, it was all fireworks. Jess was spontaneous, adventurous, and full of life. She introduced me to new music, took me to hidden spots around the city, and made every moment feel like an adventure. We would stay up late, talking about our dreams and fears, and I felt a connection I hadn't felt with anyone before. It was intoxicating. But as time went on, those fireworks started to dim, and the colors began to fade. It started subtly. She would get upset if I hung out with my friends without her. At first, I brushed it off as her being protective or just wanting to be included. But soon, it escalated. A casual night out with the guys turned into a full-blown argument, and I began to feel trapped. I tried to reassure her, but nothing seemed to work. She would spiral into these dark moods, and I found myself walking on eggshells, trying to avoid triggering her next emotional outburst. Then there were the messages. Jess would send me dozens of texts while I was at work, demanding to know where I was and who I was with. I thought it was just her way of expressing affection, but it quickly morphed into something more suffocating. I started to dread my phone buzzing. The relentless questioning began to wear me down. I felt like I was living under a microscope, and every move I made was scrutinized. One night, I came home late from work. I had stayed an extra hour to finish up a project, and I thought nothing of it until I walked through the door. Jess was waiting for me, arms crossed, a storm brewing in her eyes. Her mood shifted from anger to tears in a matter of seconds, and I felt like I was trapped in a never-ending cycle of emotional turmoil. She accused me of being distant and not caring about her, and I tried to explain the situation, but she wouldn't hear it. It was like trying to reason with a hurricane. The turning point came during a weekend getaway to the mountains. I thought a change of scenery might help. We rented a small cabin, and at first it was perfect. We went hiking, cooked together, and shared stories around the fire. But then something snapped. I wanted to take a solo hike to clear my head, and Jess flipped out. She insisted on coming with me, and when I said I just needed some time alone, she exploded. The hike turned into a nightmare. She yelled, cried, and eventually locked herself in the cabin, refusing to speak to me. I spent hours wandering the trails, feeling more alone than ever. When we got back home, Jess started to become more unpredictable. She would show up at my workplace unannounced, insisting on having lunch with me even when I had meetings scheduled. It was flattering at first, but soon it became another layer of the suffocating atmosphere I was living in. I could feel my friends pulling away, unsure of how to handle the situation. They would ask if I was okay, and I didn't know how to answer. I was in too deep. I couldn't just walk away. One night, I found her going through my phone. My heart dropped as I realized she had gone through my texts and social media. She didn't outright confront me about it, but the silent treatment I received afterward was deafening. That's when the paranoia seeped in. I started to feel like I was living in some twisted reality show where every move I made was being filmed for her amusement. I was exhausted, but each time I considered ending things, I felt guilty. Jess had a way of making me believe I was the problem, that I was the one pushing her away. The final straw came when she showed up at my apartment uninvited, with a suitcase in tow. She had decided that she was moving in. I couldn't breathe. I tried to explain that it was too soon, that I wasn't ready for that kind of commitment, but she just sat there, tears streaming down her face. I felt trapped in my own home, suffocated by her presence. After a few days of her practically living in my space, I snapped. It was like the dam had broken, and all the frustration I had bottled up came pouring out. I told her it was over. Her reaction was something out of a horror movie. Instead of accepting it, she insisted that it was just a rough patch and that we could work through it. I had finally reached my limit. I missed the carefree days of our early relationship. I missed being able to breathe without feeling like I was choking on someone else's insecurities. Jess didn't take it well. Over the next few weeks, she bombarded me with messages and showed up at my work, at the gym, anywhere I went. It felt like I was being stalked. I tried to ignore it, but it only escalated. She started posting vague emotional messages on social media, implying that I had betrayed her trust. She even tagged me in posts that made it look like I was the villain in our story. I felt my anxiety skyrocket as I watched our mutual friends start to take sides. Eventually, I had to block her on everything. It was a decision that felt terrifying but necessary. I thought that would be the end of it, but it only seemed to fuel her fire. She found other ways to get to me, contacting my friends, asking them to convince me to talk to her. I felt like I was in the middle of a messy divorce without ever being married. After a few months, things calmed down, and I started to breathe again. I learned to reclaim my space, my time, and my sanity. Every now and then, I would hear whispers about her. Someone spotted her at a bar, or she was dating someone new. It was like a ghost that haunted my past, a reminder of the chaos I had escaped. I had moved on, but the memory of Jess lingered like a shadow, a testament to how love can sometimes twist into something dark and suffocating. Sometimes I still think about what went wrong. Were there signs I missed? Could I have handled things differently? But then I remember the weight that had settled on my chest, the feeling of losing myself in someone else's madness, and I feel a sense of relief wash over me. I escaped her, and that was the only victory I needed. I thought I knew what crazy looked like until I met Jenna. It all started with a harmless swipe right on a dating app, and I didn't think much of it at the time. She had a captivating smile and an adventurous spirit that made my heart race. Our first few dates were perfect. We laughed, shared stories, and I felt like I was on cloud nine. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to see glimpses of something darker beneath that charming exterior. At first, it was subtle. Jenna would text me late at night, asking where I was and who I was with, even if I was just hanging out with friends. I brushed it off as her being excited about our new relationship. After all, I was smitten, and who doesn't get a little jealous sometimes? But the texts kept coming, and I could feel my phone buzzing with her messages even during work hours. The urgency in her texts began to creep me out, but I ignored my instinct, convincing myself it was just her way of showing she cared. Things escalated when I started noticing her social media activity. Jenna would comment on my posts within seconds of me uploading them, often tagging herself in photos I hadn't even shared with her. It was like she had radar for my online presence. I remember one time I posted a picture with a group of friends at a bar, and less than an hour later she commented, "Looks like fun." Wish I was there. I hadn't invited her because I wanted to hang out with my friends without her hovering over me. A nagging feeling settled in the pit of my stomach, but I was too wrapped up in the whirlwind of romance to admit something was off. As the weeks went by, I started to pull back. I realized that I needed my space, but But every time I tried to distance myself, Jenna would ramp up her affection. She'd surprise me at work with lunch or show up at my favorite coffee shop, acting like it was a coincidence. It was sweet at first, but soon it felt suffocating. I found myself getting anxious about when she would pop up next. I tried to talk to her about needing some time alone, but she dismissed my concerns, insisting that we were meant to be together. I was torn. The chemistry was undeniable, but I was beginning to feel trapped. One night, I got home from a long day, exhausted and ready to relax. I plopped down on the couch and turned on the TV, hoping to escape into a show for a few hours. Just as I started to unwind, there was a knock at my door. I glanced at my phone, surprised to see it was Jenna. I hadn't invited her over, and honestly, I wasn't in the mood for company. But before I could say anything, she had let herself in, as if she had a key. It was then that I noticed the change in her demeanor. She seemed jittery, almost hyper. She started tidying up my living room, placing my scattered belongings in neat little piles, rearranging things as if my space was hers to control. At first, I thought it was a quirky habit, but as she continued, I felt a sense of unease creep over me. I finally mustered the courage to tell her that I needed some space, but she just laughed it off, saying she was helping me. It felt like I was being swept away in a tide I couldn't fight against. Her behavior became more erratic after that. One weekend, I decided to go camping with my friends, hoping to escape the chaos of our relationship. I didn't tell Jenna where I was going, thinking it was a harmless choice. By the second night, I received a frantic message from her. She had tracked my phone using a shared location app we had set up for safety reasons. She showed up at our campsite uninvited, her eyes wide and frantic as she searched for me in the dark. It was terrifying to realize she had been watching my every move, convinced I was doing something behind her back. That weekend turned into a nightmare. I tried to explain to her that it was a guy's trip, but she didn't want to hear it. Instead, she insisted on staying, claiming she just wanted to ensure I was safe. The tension was thick as my friends looked at me, unsure of how to navigate the situation. I felt trapped between wanting to protect myself and not wanting to hurt her feelings. After that, I finally decided to end things. I thought it would be straightforward, a clean break. But Jenna didn't take it well. The day after our conversation, she showed up at my workplace with a bouquet of flowers and a giant balloon that read, "I love you." I was mortified, and suddenly everyone was staring. I tried to remain calm, but inside I was panicking. I asked her to leave, but she just stood there, unblinking and smiling, as if I hadn't just shattered her world. From then on, things spiraled out of control. She began to send me hundreds of messages, long, rambling texts filled with confusion, anger, and desperate pleas to get back together. I started ignoring her, but that only seemed to fuel the fire. One morning, I woke up to find a dozen missed calls and a voicemail that sounded like a mixture of sobbing and anger. It was clear she was losing her grip on reality. I didn't feel safe anymore. I started changing my routines, avoiding places where I thought she might show up. But no matter how much I tried to distance myself, Jenna always found a way back into my life. She would leave notes on my car, send me packages filled with things I'd mentioned in passing, and even managed to show up at my family gatherings. It was like she had a sixth sense for where I would be, and it terrified me. The final straw came when I found out she had been showing up at my apartment while I was gone. I came home one night to find my door ajar and my living room in disarray. It looked like someone had rifled through my belongings. I called the police and they filed a report, but they couldn't do anything without solid evidence. It was infuriating and frightening, knowing that she was so close and yet so far from understanding how unhealthy her behavior had become. Eventually, I had to move. I packed up my life and relocated to a different city, hoping to leave her behind. I changed my phone number, blocked her on social media, and avoided mutual friends who might accidentally let something slip. It took months for the anxiety to fade, but I learned to reclaim my life piece by piece. It was a brutal experience, one that left me shaken, but I emerged stronger, more self-aware, and determined to never let anyone into my life who would make me question my safety and sanity again. Jenna was a chapter one hoped to close, but the memories still lingered. It was a harsh reminder of how love can sometimes morph into obsession and how quickly the line between affection and madness can blur. I never thought I'd end up in a situation like that, but sometimes life throws curveballs you're not ready for. Looking back, I can't help but cringe at the memories, but it's like watching a horror movie where you can't look away, even when you want to. It all started when I met Sarah. I was fresh out of college, trying to make my way in the world, and she seemed like a breath of fresh air. She was funny, smart, and had this wild, adventurous spirit that pulled me in like a moth to a flame. At first, everything was perfect. We went on spontaneous road trips, tried out new restaurants, and spent hours just talking about everything and nothing. But as it often goes, the honeymoon phase quickly faded, and I found myself knee-deep in a mess I never saw coming. It began subtly. Sarah would make little comments about my friends, how they weren't really my type, or how they were too wild for me. At first, I brushed it off, thinking she was just being protective. But then it escalated. She started to show up unannounced when I was hanging out with my buddies, claiming she was just in the area. I thought it was sweet at first, a way of showing she cared. But soon it became suffocating. I get texts while I was out, asking where I was, who I was with, and if I could send a picture. It felt like I was living in a reality show, and I was the unwilling star. I tried to talk to her about it, but she'd flipped the script, turning my concerns into accusations that I was being distant. I began to feel trapped, like my whole life was being scrutinized under a magnifying glass. I started distancing myself from my friends, fearing her reactions. It was insane how quickly I went from feeling free and happy to feeling like I had to tiptoe around my own life. I thought maybe it was just a phase, something she'd grow out of, but it only got worse. One weekend, I went to a concert with a couple of friends. I didn't think anything of it. We were just there to enjoy the music and have a good time. But Sarah had other ideas. She showed up halfway through the show, her face a mixture of anger and disappointment. I could feel the eyes of my friends on me, silently questioning why she was there. I tried to play it cool, but inside I was panicking. I knew that this wasn't just about the concert anymore. It was about control, and she was determined to take it. After that, things spiraled. Sarah would randomly check my phone when I wasn't looking, scrolling through my messages and social media. I'd catch her in the act more than once, and every time she'd laugh it off, claiming she was just curious. But I felt violated. It felt like she was trying to erase my autonomy, and I was helpless to stop it. The worst part was that I felt guilty for feeling this way. She'd twist everything I said, making me feel like I was the one who was irrational. I started to question my own sanity. Then came the night that changed everything. I had planned a night out with some old college friends, and I was excited to reconnect. But as I prepared, the anxiety in my stomach grew. I knew Sarah wouldn't be happy about me going out without her. I tried to keep it low-key, but of course she found out. She showed up at the bar, and I could see the storm brewing in her eyes the moment she walked in. I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation, and when it came, it was like a scene out of a bad movie. She made a scene, yelling about how I didn't care about her and how I was just using my friends to escape her. It was mortifying, and I felt the heat of shame wash over me as I tried to calm her down. That night ended with me apologizing profusely in an attempt to diffuse the situation. I thought maybe we could talk it out, but it only seemed to fuel her fire. She accused me of having secrets, of hiding things from her. The paranoia seeped into our relationship like poison, and I found myself on the defensive more often than not. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, and every time I thought about standing up for myself, I was met with guilt and confusion. Things reached a breaking point a few weeks later. I had planned a weekend getaway with my friends to clear my head and maybe find some perspective. I figured it would be a good way to reset, but Sarah didn't see it that way. She bombarded me with texts leading up to the trip, her messages dripping with passive aggression. I ended up canceling on my friends, thinking it would smooth things over. But instead of gratitude, I was met with a cold silence that spoke volumes. It was then that I realized I was in way over my head. I was losing myself in this relationship, becoming someone I didn't even recognize. I felt suffocated, trapped in a toxic cycle of manipulation and fear. The love I once felt for Sarah was overshadowed by the realization that it was no longer a partnership but a prison. I started planning my exit, trying to figure out how to break free without triggering a meltdown. I had seen her react violently before. The thought of it made my heart race. Finally, the day came. I gathered my courage and told her I needed space. It was meant to be a gentle nudge, but Sarah didn't take it well. The look in her eyes shifted from confusion to something darker. I knew then that I had to leave, and I had to do it fast. I packed a bag and left while she was at work, hoping to slip away quietly. I thought I could escape the chaos, but the aftermath was far from simple. The following weeks were a blur of anxiety. Sarah bombarded my phone with calls and messages, each one more frantic than the last. I blocked her, but she found ways to reach out through friends and social media. I started to feel paranoid, like she was lurking around every corner. Then came a night I got a text from an unknown number, a picture of my house taken from the street. My heart dropped. I had never felt so violated in my life. It was clear she was watching me, and I was terrified of what she might do next. I moved to a different city, changing my number and cutting ties with everyone who knew me there. It was drastic, but I felt like it was the only way to regain control over my life. I'd like to say that was the end of it, but the scars remained. I had to grapple with the emotional fallout and the reality that I had let someone take so much from me. Looking back, I can't believe I let it go that far. It's a wild ride when you realize that love can turn toxic, and sometimes the craziest ex is the one who wears a mask of charm and sweetness while hiding a darker side. I never thought I'd find myself in one of those crazy ex stories you hear about. The kind that makes you question your own sanity and the sanity of everyone around you. But here I am, spilling the tea on my own personal horror show. Let me take you back a few years when I was blissfully unaware of what was to come. I was dating this girl, Sarah. On the surface, she seemed perfect. Smart, funny, and beautiful. Everything I thought I wanted. We hit it off right away, and everything felt like a fairy tale in the beginning. We spent hours just talking, sharing secrets, and planning our future together. It felt like we were on the same wavelength, and I couldn't see the storm brewing beneath that seemingly calm exterior. The first signs of trouble came in small, almost insignificant waves. Little things that I brushed off at first. She was a bit possessive, but I figured that was just her being passionate. I remember a night when I went out with friends to celebrate a birthday. It was nothing big, just a few drinks and some laughter. I texted her throughout the night, but she seemed oddly distant. When I got home, she was waiting for me, arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. I asked what was wrong, and she just shrugged it off, but I could see the storm brewing in her eyes. I thought maybe she was just tired or having a bad day. I should have known better. As weeks turned into months, her possessiveness escalated. It started with checking my phone while I was in the shower. I come out to find her scrolling through my texts, looking for evidence of infidelity that wasn't there. I tried to reassure her to calm her fears, but it only seemed to make things worse. She'd accuse me of lying, of hiding things, and I'd find myself walking on eggshells, trying to avoid the next explosion. I was caught in this strange game where I was constantly trying to prove my loyalty, but no matter what I did, it was never enough for her. Then came the social media blitz. Sarah became obsessed with our online presence. She wanted to control every post, every picture, every comment. I couldn't tag friends without her getting upset, and I found myself deleting old photos just to keep the peace. It felt like I was living in a prison of her making, and I was losing myself. Friends began noticing the shift in my demeanor, but I brushed off their concerns. I didn't want to believe that the woman I loved could be capable of such manipulation. I told myself I just needed to be more understanding, more patient. Things took a darker turn one night when we were at a party. I was chatting with a friend when I noticed Sarah glaring from across the room. I thought she was joking at first, but when she marched over and pulled me aside, I realized this wasn't just a casual jealousy. She confronted me in front of everyone, accusing me of flirting and being unfaithful. The embarrassment was unbearable, and I felt like everyone was staring at us, judging me. I tried to explain, but she cut me off, her voice rising. The party fizzled out after that, and we left in a suffocating silence. It wasn't until we got to her apartment that the real nightmare began. The moment we stepped inside, she unleashed her fury. The things she said cut deeper than I could have imagined. I stood there frozen as she hurled accusations my way, each one more ridiculous than the last. I tried to reason with her, but she was in full-blown rage mode, and it was like trying to calm a tornado. I knew I needed to leave, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the love I still had for her despite everything. That night, she broke things. Not just the usual emotional stuff, but actual physical things. She smashed her favorite vase against the wall, sending shards everywhere. I felt a mix of horror and disbelief. This was not the woman I fell for. She was unraveling before my eyes, and I didn't know how to help her. I eventually managed to escape her apartment, heart racing, but the aftermath lingered like smoke in the air. After that night, I decided to put some distance between us. I thought maybe a break would help her get her head straight. But instead, she went into full-on stalker mode. She started showing up at my workplace, randomly appearing at coffee shops I frequented, and even found out where my family lived. I was terrified. I had no idea how she was tracking me, but it felt like I was living in a horror movie. Friends would joke about crazy exes, but I was living it, and it wasn't funny. I went to the police, thinking maybe they could do something, but they couldn't help unless she crossed a line that was legally actionable. They suggested I get a restraining order, but I hesitated, feeling guilty. I didn't want to ruin her life, but I also didn't want to be her next victim. I tried to keep my head down, to lay low, but the more I ignored her, the more desperate she became. Then came the culminating moment that pushed me over the edge. I returned home one evening to find my apartment ransacked. My belongings were thrown everywhere, and the unmistakable scent of her perfume lingered in the air. My heart dropped as I realized she had crossed a line I never thought she would. This was no longer a relationship gone wrong. It was a full-blown invasion. I called the police, and this time they took it seriously. They filed a report and advised me to change my locks and security codes, but I still felt trapped. It was a terrifying realization when I came to terms with the fact that someone I once loved had become someone I feared. With the police involved and a restraining order in place, I finally felt a shred of relief. I started to rebuild my life piece by piece, but the scars of that relationship lingered. The paranoia of being watched, the fear of running into her, it all haunted me for months. Eventually, I moved away, starting fresh in a new city far from the chaos. With time, I learned to trust again, but that experience taught me a lot about red flags and the dark side of love. I still find myself looking over my shoulder occasionally, but I do my best to keep moving forward, knowing that some people just aren't meant to be in your life. Sarah was a chapter one never wanted to write, but it's a part of my story now, and I'm learning to live with it. I've had my fair share of relationships, the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre, but nothing could have prepared me for Sarah. I thought I knew what crazy looked like until I met her. It started off normal, like any other relationship. We met at this local coffee shop, both of us reaching for the last blueberry muffin. It was cute, really. We started talking, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. I should have seen the red flags, but love has a way of blinding you. In the beginning, everything was perfect. Sarah was charming and funny, and I was completely smitten. We spent every waking moment together, exploring the city, trying new restaurants, and binge-watching our favorite shows. The connection felt electric, and I convinced myself that I had finally found the one. Friends said I was moving too fast, but I just brushed off their concerns. Who doesn't want to believe in a fairy tale? About 3 months in, things started to shift. It began with small things, like her getting upset when I hung out with my friends without her. I told myself it was just her being protective. But when I tried to have a guy's night, she would show up uninvited, making it awkward for everyone. I thought it was sweet at first, this overwhelming desire to be together, but soon it morphed into something unsettling. She would send me texts throughout the day, asking where I was and who I was with. I tried to brush it off as her just being affectionate, but it started to feel suffocating. One night, we were out at a bar with friends. I stepped outside to take a call from my buddy, and when I returned, Sarah was furious. Apparently, she had seen me talking to another girl and had convinced herself I was cheating. I didn't even know the girl's name, but Sarah didn't care. She made a scene, yelling and drawing attention from everyone around us. I felt embarrassed and confused, trying to explain that it was nothing. Eventually, I managed to calm her down, but the incident left me shaken. It felt like I was walking on eggshells. As weeks turned into months, Sarah's jealousy only escalated. She began checking my phone when I wasn't looking, snooping through my messages and social media. I come home to find her sitting on my bed, scrolling through my Instagram, her face twisted in anger over some harmless comment a girl had left on a photo. I tried to reason with her, explaining my need for privacy, but it only made her more upset. It was like I was caught in this web of her insecurities, and I was losing my grip on reality. Then came the big blow. One evening, I was working late, and she texted me asking where I was. I told her I was at the office, but I could sense something off. She didn't respond for a while, and when she finally did, it was a flurry of frantic texts accusing me of lying. I tried to call her to explain, but she wouldn't pick up. When I got home, she was there waiting for me, and what followed was a night I'll never forget. She had somehow found out my location through some app one didn't even know existed. I had no idea how she managed that, but the realization sent chills down my spine. She confronted me with this twisted sense of betrayal, demanding to know why I was lying. I thought things couldn't get worse, but they did. One day, I came home to find my apartment door ajar. My heart raced as I stepped inside, half expecting to find a burglar. Instead, I found Sarah sitting in the middle of my living room, surrounded by all my personal belongings. She had gone through my closet, rifled through my drawers, and even taken pictures of things she deemed suspicious. It was like walking into a crime scene. I stood there horrified as she explained that she was just trying to figure out if I was hiding something. I felt like a stranger in my own home. By that point, I knew I had to get out. I tried to break things off, but she wouldn't let me. It was like I was in a horror movie where the villain just wouldn't die. She started showing up at my workplace, waiting outside, and sending me messages filled with threats. I remember one particularly chilling text where she said she would ruin my life if I ever left her. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. It felt like I was dealing with a different person altogether. I began to fear for my safety, worried about what she might do next. I decided to reach out to my friends for help. They were supportive, but nothing could prepare them for the reality of Sarah's obsession. One night, we went out for drinks, and I recounted everything. They urged me to go to the police, but I hesitated. I didn't want to escalate things further, but I was terrified of what might happen if I didn't take action. Eventually, I filed a report, but it didn't do much. The police told me that unless she physically harmed me, there wasn't much they could do. Finding an escape was harder than I thought. I started distancing myself from her, pretending to be busy with work or out of town. But Sarah was relentless. She once showed up at my friend's house, demanding to know where I was. I was in the next room, listening to her scream. It was surreal, and I felt trapped in a nightmare. When I finally worked up the courage to move, I did it in secret. I packed my things while she was at work and took off to a new city. I blocked her on all social media and changed my phone number. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, leaving behind what I once thought was love. But I was finally free, or so I thought. Months later, I received a text from an unknown number. My heart sank as I read the message. It was a picture of me, taken from a distance, standing in front of my new apartment. I didn't think I'd ever feel that kind of fear again, but there it was creeping back in. I changed my locks and installed security cameras, doing everything I could to protect myself. I never saw her again, but the feeling of being hunted lingered, a constant reminder of the madness I had escaped. Sometimes I wonder what happened to her, if she still thinks about me, or if she's moved on. But I know one thing for sure. I'll never let myself fall into that kind of chaos again. I never thought I'd end up in a situation that felt like it was ripped straight from a bad rom-com, but here I am, recounting the absurdity of my relationship with my ex Sarah. It all started out like any other normal relationship. We met at a mutual friend's party. She had this infectious laugh and an energy that pulled everyone in. It was hard not to be captivated by her charm. We hit it off right away, and what started as a casual fling quickly spiraled into a full-blown relationship. In the beginning, everything was perfect. We spent every weekend together, exploring the city, binge-watching shows, and having deep conversations about the future. Sarah had this way of making everything feel so intense and passionate. I thought I was lucky to have found someone who was as adventurous and spontaneous as I was. But as time went on, I began to see the cracks in our fairy tale. It started with small things that I brushed off as quirks. She was incredibly possessive, always wanting to know where I was and who I was with. At first, I thought it was cute. Who wouldn't want someone who cared that much? But then it became suffocating. I could feel myself being pulled into this whirlwind of anxiety every time I stepped out without her. Sarah would text me constantly, demanding updates, and each ping felt like a noose tightening around my neck. As months went by, the possessiveness escalated into something much darker. She would check my phone when I wasn't looking, going through my messages and social media. I was shocked when I found out she had downloaded an app that tracked my location. When I confronted her about it, she brushed it off, saying it was for my safety, but I felt like I was living in a prison. It was no longer a relationship. It felt more like captivity. I tried to talk to her about my feelings, but every time I did, it turned into a huge fight. Sarah had this ability to twist my words around, making me feel guilty for bringing up my discomfort. I started to doubt my own sanity. Was I overreacting? Was it really that bad? It was like I was stuck in this fog of confusion. I wanted to leave, but the thought of hurting her made me hesitate. I was in too deep, and the fear of what she might do if I left kept me tethered to her. Things came to a head during a weekend trip we took to a cabin in the woods. I thought it would be a chance for us to reconnect, to escape the chaos of our everyday lives. But as soon as we arrived, I could sense the tension. Sarah was on edge, and it didn't take long for her jealousy to rear its ugly head. A couple of guys at a neighboring cabin were being friendly, and Sarah flipped out. She stormed over to them, making a scene, and I stood there mortified. That night, she confronted me about how I looked at them. It was ridiculous. I hadn't even been paying attention to them, but Sarah was convinced I was going to leave her for someone better. It escalated into a full-blown argument, and I ended up sleeping on the couch while she paced around the cabin, ranting about loyalty and trust. By morning, I was exhausted and ready to leave, but Sarah wasn't having it. She didn't want to drive back home, insisting we needed to talk things out. We spent that entire day in a standoff, and I could feel the walls closing in. After a few hours of silence, she finally broke down. It was like watching a storm pass. She cried, saying she was scared of losing me, and for a moment I felt pity. But then the storm returned, and she revealed just how far her paranoia had pushed her. That's when she told me about the things she had done. She confessed to showing up at my workplace unannounced, checking my emails, and even calling my friends to ask about my whereabouts. I remember the chill that ran down my spine. It was as if a switch flipped in my head. I was no longer talking to my girlfriend. I was facing a stranger. I knew I had to leave, but breaking up with her was like trying to dismantle a bomb. I was terrified of what she would do. I waited a few days after returning home, hoping things would cool down. But every time I thought about ending it, I imagined her furious, her tears morphing into rage. I finally built up the courage to break up with her over the phone. I thought it would be safer that way, but it only escalated the situation. The next few days were a blur. I got random texts filled with threats, pleading messages, and even photos of her crying. It was disturbing, and I felt trapped. I changed my phone number, blocked her on social media, and tried to move on with my life. But that didn't work. She somehow found me. I was at a coffee shop when I saw her walk in, scanning the room. My heart dropped. I ducked behind a column, praying she wouldn't see me. For weeks, I lived in fear, constantly looking over my shoulder. I couldn't go to the places I used to love. Every sound made my heart race. I felt like I was in a thriller movie, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Eventually, I decided to involve authorities. I filed for a restraining order, but the whole process was exhausting and humiliating. I still remember the day I finally got a call that she had been spotted near my apartment. She was lurking around, trying to catch a glimpse of me. It was terrifying. I moved out of that apartment, changed jobs, and tried to rebuild my life piece by piece. Months passed, and just when I thought I could breathe again, I received a letter in the mail. It was from her. She wrote about how she missed me, how she was going to change, and how it was all my fault. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It was clear she was still in that dark place, and there was no way I could go back to that life. So here I am, more than a year later, still processing everything that happened. I'm dating again, but I find it hard to trust. I often wonder if I'll ever shake off the shadows of that relationship. It's a strange feeling, knowing someone once held so much power over you. The scars may fade, but the memory of Sarah, my crazy ex, will linger on. I thought I was just living my life. The typical young adult grind. Work, friends, a bit of dating here and there. Nothing too wild, just the kind of chaos that comes with being in your 20s. But then I met her. At first, it seemed like a match made in heaven. She was everything I thought I wanted, smart, funny, and with a wild streak that matched my own. I was instantly drawn in, and the more I got to know her, the more I fell. But somewhere between the wild nights and intimate conversations, things took a turn. It all started innocently enough. We would hang out at this dive bar downtown, sharing drinks and stories until the early hours of the morning. She told me about her past relationships, funny anecdotes about her family, and how she had moved to the city to escape a boring life. I loved her energy, the way she lit up the room. There was something magnetic about her that pulled me in deeper. But as I got closer, I started to notice these little quirks that made me uncomfortable. Like how she would get irrationally upset if I didn't text her back within a certain time frame. How she would constantly scroll through my social media, liking old pictures from years ago. I shrugged it off at first. Everyone has their quirks, right? But it didn't stop there. After a few months, the sweet, carefree vibe took a dark turn. I started to notice signs that hinted at something deeper, something unsettling. She became increasingly possessive, questioning my every move. If I went out with friends, she would send me a barrage of texts asking where I was, who I was with, and when I'd be home. At first, I thought it was just a sign of her affection, but the more it happened, the more it felt suffocating. I tried to talk to her about it, but she would just brush it off, insisting it was because she cared so much. Things escalated one weekend when I decided to go out with my friends for a birthday party. I thought it was a harmless night out, just a few drinks and some laughs. But when I got home, she was waiting for me. The look on her face sent a chill down my spine. She had clearly been drinking, and her mood was erratic. She accused me of cheating, of having fun without her. I tried to explain that it was just a typical night out, but she didn't want to hear it. The situation quickly devolved into a shouting match, and I found myself backing away, feeling trapped in a corner. I ended up leaving the apartment, just needing to breathe and think. The next few weeks were a blur of tension. I tried to tiptoe around her moods, but nothing seemed to work. I could feel myself withdrawing, but she didn't let me. She would show up at my job unannounced, bringing lunch or wanting to surprise me. It was sweet at first, but it started feeling invasive. I would catch her watching me from a distance, her eyes burning into my back while I tried to focus on work. The worst part was that she had this way of twisting everything. If I expressed discomfort, she would turn it around, making it seem like I was the one who was unreasonable. I was starting to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. I began to doubt my own feelings and perceptions. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I was the one who needed to change. I started talking to friends about it, and while they were supportive, I could see the concern in their eyes. They urged me to break it off, but I was too far in, too entangled in her web. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Saturday, and I was supposed to meet my friends for dinner. I had told her about it earlier in the week, and she seemed fine, but as the day approached, I could feel the tension building. I left the apartment feeling uneasy, and as soon as I got to the restaurant, I noticed my phone blowing up with messages from her. The texts went from playful to frantic within minutes. She was convinced I was going to leave her for someone else. I tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't have it. By the time I got back home, she was in a rage. I found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by broken glass and scattered things from our apartment. She had taken her anger out on my stuff, shattering a few of my favorite items. In that moment, it hit me. This was not love. I had to get out. I made the decision to leave that night, packing a bag and slipping out while she was still occupied with her chaos. I crashed at a friend's place, but I knew that would only be a temporary solution. I spent the next few days trying to figure out how to break things off for good. I knew she would retaliate, and the thought of that terrified me. When I finally mustered the courage to end things, she took it worse than I could have imagined. She bombarded me with texts, called me incessantly, and even showed up at my friend's place, demanding to know why I was doing this. I blocked her number, but she found other ways to reach out. She started showing up at my workplace, waiting for me outside, and I had to involve security just to feel safe. That's when the real nightmare began. She took to social media, posting cryptic messages that felt like direct attacks. She would post pictures of us, captioned with things that made it seem like I had been the villain all along. Friends started reaching out to me, confused and worried. I felt like I was living in a horror movie where the ex-girlfriend was the villain, and I was just trying to escape. Eventually, I had to change my number, even move to a different part of the city. It was exhausting, and I felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder. I never thought I would have a crazy ex story to tell, but here I was living it. Now, looking back, I can hardly believe how quickly things escalated. It serves as a reminder of how love can blind you, how easy it is to overlook red flags when you're caught up in the excitement of new romance. It's been a while since that chapter ended, but the experience still lingers. I'm careful now, more aware of the signs. But even with that awareness, I can't shake the feeling that there are some things you just can't prepare for. I thought I knew what crazy meant until I met Sarah. It all started when we met at a friend's party. She had this magnetic energy that pulled everyone in. I was drawn to her laughter, her wild stories, and the way she made the mundane feel like an adventure. We hit it off immediately, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. But looking back, I should have seen the red flags waving in the wind. At first, it was all sunshine and rainbows. We went on spontaneous road trips, danced until dawn at random bars, and shared our deepest secrets under the stars. But soon, the thrills started to wear off, and the cracks began to show. It was subtle at first, little things that I shrugged off as quirks. She would text me constantly, checking in to see where I was and who I was with. I thought it was cute, a sign of how much she cared. But as the weeks went by, those cute texts turned into a flood of messages that would leave my phone buzzing uncomfortably. Then came the jealousy. It started innocently enough. She would get a little quiet if I mentioned hanging out with friends, especially if they were girls. I tried to reassure her, but it only seemed to fuel the fire. I found myself walking on eggshells, careful not to provoke her insecurities. I started avoiding certain topics, steering clear of anything that might set her off. It was like living with a ticking time bomb, and I had no idea when it would go off. Things escalated quickly. One night, I went out with some friends, just a casual hangout. I sent her a quick text to say I was out, and that was enough to send her into a tailspin. She showed up at the bar unannounced, and the look on her face when she saw me laughing with my friends was something out of a horror movie. I tried to calm her down, but she was in full meltdown mode. It was as if the fun atmosphere of the bar had turned dark, and I suddenly felt trapped in a nightmare. After that night, I thought maybe it was just a one-time thing, a moment of weakness. But the paranoia only grew stronger. She would check my phone when I wasn't looking, scroll through my social media, and keep tabs on everyone I interacted with. I felt like I was living in a cage, suffocating under the weight of her suspicions. Every time I tried to talk to her about it, she would spin it around, making me feel like I was the problem for making her feel this way. I tried to distance myself, thinking that maybe a little space would help. But instead, Sarah's behavior took a turn for the worse. She would show up at my apartment unannounced, and if I didn't answer the door quickly enough, she would start banging on it, yelling my name like I was some sort of criminal. Each time, I felt a mix of fear and anger. I wanted to scream at her to get a grip, but I knew that would only ignite the fire. So I learned to keep quiet and let her have her moments. It got to a point where I couldn't even focus on my own life. Friends started noticing the change in me. I was jumpy, anxious. I would cancel plans last minute, fearing what kind of scene Sarah might create if she found out I was with other people. My friends tried to intervene, but I was too deep in the rabbit hole. I would defend her, saying she was just going through a tough time, that she needed me. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, and I had finally mustered the courage to tell Sarah that I needed some space. I figured it was time to lay it all out on the table and put an end to the madness. I thought maybe, just maybe, she would understand. But as I took a deep breath and started to explain my feelings, her face morphed from confusion to rage in an instant. There was no reasoning with her. She started throwing things around my apartment, smashing a couple of my favorite mugs, and I stood there frozen, watching the chaos unfold. In that moment, I realized I was in way over my head. I didn't recognize the person standing in front of me. This was not the carefree girl I had fallen for. This was someone consumed by something darker. I decided enough was enough. I told her to leave, and as the words left my mouth, the look she gave me was terrifying. It was like I had summoned a demon, and I could feel the anger radiating from her. I didn't know what she was capable of, but I had to get her out of my life. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and dread. She wouldn't stop calling and texting, flooding my phone with messages that ranged from pleading to threatening. I blocked her number, but she found other ways to reach me. She would show up at my work, standing outside like a lost puppy, or send me messages through mutual friends. I felt like I was being hunted, and I couldn't escape. As I distanced myself, I started to hear whispers from our friends. They were worried about her. saying she was spiraling out of control. I felt guilty for leaving her, but I also knew that if I didn't protect myself, I wouldn't survive this relationship. It was a weight I carried with me everywhere, and it gnawed at me. One day, I finally got a message from her that shook me to my core. It was a photo of my apartment, taken from across the street. I felt my heart drop as I realized she had been watching me. I had been so focused on getting away from her that I hadn't considered how far she might go. That was my breaking point. I contacted the authorities, and they helped me file a restraining order. It felt surreal, like I was living in a bad thriller movie. The aftermath was a mix of relief and lingering fear. I changed my routines, started hanging out with different people, and even moved to a new apartment. It was like starting over, but I knew that the scars of that relationship would linger for a long time. I had learned the hard way that sometimes the person you think you know the best can reveal a side of themselves that's utterly terrifying. I still think about Sarah, not with longing, but with a sense of caution. It's a lesson I didn't want to learn, but one that's now etched into my memory.